Kia ora koutou, checking that is coming through for everyone.
Looks great.
That's great.
Excellent. Hey, really pleased to be with you this way today and look forward to seeing you in person at another point in time. Just going to take you through a few slides relating to farm planning and welcome questions and discussion at the end. The first thing that I want to position to you is that there's a lot of things on our radar at the moment, and we can look at these in a number of different ways. But what I want to encourage you to think about is where there's change, there's opportunity. And so opportunity can bring lots of new perspectives to us. One of the things that Winston Churchill's known for saying is a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity and an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. And so if we start with that mindset of where's the opportunity in the changes that are in front of us, we'll look for much better outcomes and make them happen. The second thing that I want to encourage you to think about in relation to planning is that plans are nothing on their own. Planning is everything. And so what I really want to reinforce in that is that it's the process of planning that we want to work through. And for many of us, documenting what we've been doing is the real essence of planning. And the change that we're now asked to do is to record evidence of our background assumptions and risk assessment or actions taken or planned. So we're really looking to make sure that we've got good evidence around the things that we are doing now. So I hope that set the scene nicely as we start getting to the detail of planning for you. It is the process that we want you to focus on and gain value from. But you'll be well familiar, I'm sure, that there's lots of discussion in regard to planning at this point across the wider media and through some of the regulatory bodies and other messages coming out. And there's all sorts of different words and phrases used in regard to planning, from land environment plans, winter grazing plans, greenhouse gas farm plans, certified freshwater farm plans, integrated farm planning. It goes on and on. There's a few that we'll focus on as we go through, because there's some things that we can start working on now that can help us be well ready for what these other things may require of us. But importantly, we want to think also about how we can use this to ensure that our business is stronger and more resilient, and that we're supporting and providing the information that helps our consumers continue to trust and pay premiums or recognise the value that we're creating as we produce food and fibre for them. From a beef and lamb perspective, we've got a vision in regard to planning and farm planning, and that's in essence that every commercial farm has a recorded active farm plan. And that's something that will provide you the opportunity to meet regulatory and market requirements, ideally around over the next 3 to 5 years. What we want to make sure in that activity is that the process is cost effective and streamlined, and things like data, when it's entered once, can be used multiple times for multiple processes. But most importantly, that active farm plans guide on-farm decision making. So out of a more detailed planning process, we've got a more economic, a more resilient farm. We're gaining overall business performance and contributing to the overall goals of our business. What is it that we're looking for in a farm plan? Well, this is the framework that we're providing through Beef and Lamb. It starts by detailing our overall farm vision and documenting some of the resources that we have that contribute to that. We've then got a range of modules that fit within that. For example, an environment module is where our core focus is at the moment, but we could put other things like biosecurity, like people management. If we employ staff on our farm, we'll have lots of processes documented around those already. They can sit under our farm plan framework as well, same as animal welfare and your health and safety farm plan as well. What we're going to focus on at this point is the environment module, as we look at what that means and how we can use that at this point in time. The environment module is built from the former LEP work that many of you may have done on your farms. It now has 7 chapters, which range from managing soil health and freshwater ecosystem health right through to forage cropping management. What we offer you with the farm plan process is the opportunity to either go through the entire environment module as one workshop, as a series of workshops, or shortly the opportunity to do it part by part. So if you want to just focus on a couple of these chapters or one of these chapters because they're really critical to your business at this point, we want to enable you to do that. The other aspect you may have heard of is MPI's approach to integrated farm planning. And so they've got this document they circulated a couple of weeks ago, where they're looking to achieve a relatively similar outcome, and they acknowledge there's a number of things that impact our wider farming context. They then narrow it down to what's happening in our catchment, what's happening on farm, and finally work through a typical plan, do, review process, or in the words of MPI, know, assess, develop, etc. But that process ultimately is using some different words, but achieving the same process that we want to offer you through farm planning. How are we going about delivering this? Well, we've got two main options at present for enabling you to document your farm plan. That is to work through the environment module through a series of workshops and work through all the chapters of that, obviously focusing on the ones that are most important for your business. But we've also started with the likes of the forage cropping chapter as a standalone workshop, particularly in relation to winter grazing, but it applies to all forage cropping. And we'll shortly have an option where you can focus on climate change and your greenhouse gas aspects, and freshwater ecosystem health will follow that as well. So the opportunity to, again, focus either on, if you'd like to document your entire farm plan environment module, we'll like to help you do that. If you'd like to just do individual chapters at this point as the appropriate, then give you ways and means of doing that as well. So let's have a look at an example of how it works together. As I said before, we want to always start with our farm vision. What are we farming for? What are we out day and with our team to put in place? What are we here for? What are we looking to achieve? So let's document that, and there's some additional material that you can tap into if you don't have that currently documented. But if we've got that clear and at the top of everything we're doing, then we can relate all of our other actions and activities back to achieving that vision. So we document the farm vision. We then want to look at some of the core resources that fit into our farm and start thinking about what those are, collate our soil maps, farm maps, soil maps if we've got them, soil tests, nutrient budgets, start pulling that material together so we can think about what have we got on farm and how we can use it and ensure that we're both optimizing the value from it, but also mitigating risks that may be inherent within some of those parcels of land. And we take you through a process to then start really documenting some of the strengths and weaknesses of those various blocks, and ideally thinking about them from what we call a land management unit perspective, where we're not necessarily thinking about the way it's fenced at the moment, but what is the core strengths and weaknesses of some of those land parcels, and therefore how can we make sure that we've covered off the risks, mitigated the risks from them, and optimized the value from those parcels of land. And very often what we're really doing is documenting the detailed knowledge that we've built up from years of understanding and working a particular block of land. So most of what we will ask you or offer for you is really about documenting the things you know, but making sure it's in an easily accessible manner. So having documented your vision and values and farm resources in regard to farm planning, let's look at the role of forage cropping or winter grazing as an example of what it may look like for you. It's always good when we go through this process to think about the why and start with why are we forage cropping. So we'll ask you to note that down, and that's a good starter in terms of the things that we're then subsequently doing with it. And then we can start working through the risks, and we'll give you lots of guidance and templates in terms of documenting, analysing where the common risks are and the other risks that may be specific to your block. Ideally, we do that, again, by those land management units, groups of paddocks often, but parcels of land with similar characteristics. So here's an example of a block of land or a couple of blocks of land which has some sediment and phosphorus loss risk. and then we identify the more specific aspects of those risks, where they are on the farm, and as we progress, we can then start working out our action plan to document what we're doing about those risk areas. So CSA refers to critical source areas. So we identify the critical source areas of where our largest or most likely risks come from. Ideally, we choose to leave those in grass. We then have or want to identify where on those on our farm those parcels are, those critical source areas risks are, who's involved, and what's the time frame when we're going to be addressing those risks, to make sure that it's clear and easily able to communicate to everyone. And it's always nice to draw a sketch map, and this can be a really simple way of communicating those risks then to other parties. It means we've got things documented if we're wanting to be away, or share it with someone else to help us with some of that day-to-day activity. Having it sketched out like this is a simple way of sharing the actions that we've put in place, the thinking, the risks that we've already identified, so that we can show that we have put in good practices to minimise the risks associated with what those activities could otherwise result in. Those of you involved with winter grazing will be aware that there's been some discussion and development of government regulation into winter grazing activities. And so I just want to reinforce, I'm sure those of you involved will be well familiar, but earlier this year, the regulations were delayed for 12 months around winter grazing requirements, particularly in terms of consent requirements. But what was asked was that we have good plans in place to make sure that we are mitigating risks. And the Minister was quite clear in saying that they want to make sure that the worst practices that impact on the environment are stopped, to see that better practices are in place, and significantly that less sediment and contaminants end up in our waterways. That's, I believe, largely in place through the good work many of you are doing, but now you're documenting it as well, and I'm grateful for your input in doing that. The key now is, as we start thinking about next winter's crop areas, is to think about the possible critical source areas, etc., as we plan for where we plant those crops and how we go about that. So there'll be much more information coming out over the next few months in regard to what government is asking of us in regard to winter planning. Please stay in touch with us as we work through that with you and on behalf of you with government, to make sure we've got a workable outcome. The next thing I want to focus on for a few minutes is He Waka Eke Nara. You'll be familiar, I'm sure, with the Primary Sector Climate Action Partnership that was put in place to ensure that agriculture stayed out of the emissions trading scheme and had a viable system that farmers could work with and get value from reductions on farm from practice change to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. What's important with it is that we've got some milestones coming up that include both change on farm, but also understanding what's happening on farm and planning in regard to that. For 25% of farms this year, that's all farms, sheep, beef, dairy, deer, arable, etc., the person operating the farm is asked to know their greenhouse gas emissions, and those farms to also have a written plan in place to measure and manage their farm emissions by effectively the end of this year as well. So what does it look like, our farm plan in relation to greenhouse gas emissions? Well, what is asked is that you know your numbers, but then you identify the opportunities or not to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and capture carbon on your farm. Choose your actions to reduce those emissions or capture carbon, and keep good records. So we will shortly have a greenhouse gas calculator available to help you with that. We'll also have further options to help you in creating a plan that does these things, that helps you to understand where your emissions are coming from and what further activities you can do to reduce emissions and or capture carbon. And together, as we do this, we will ensure that we can keep agriculture out of the emissions trading scheme and make sure that we are doing our bit where we can to contribute to New Zealand's overall goals. The other Critical part in terms of farm planning that is likely to be on your radar is the certified freshwater farm plans. Now, this is part of the government's essential freshwater package. It is still not finalised. That's a critical point that I'd like you to ensure that you're well aware of. At this point, it's under development. There's some guidance and consultation material that is likely to be coming out now in July. It's been pushed back a couple of times. That will be the government consulting on a range of the criteria in relation to freshwater farm plans. The important thing is that whilst they're not required immediately, for some catchments, they will be required probably this time next year. And part of the consultation that is coming out is going to clarify exactly what is required. What we expect is that it will require things like this: a farm map identifying features of interest across your farm, such as waterways, critical source areas, areas of discharge of contaminant, potential discharge of contaminant, high erosion prone areas, other risk areas to the health of freshwater. It's likely to also require a risk assessment around specific activities that we undertake on farm that could contribute to those risks, and what actions that we're taking to mitigate those. So it's not something that is that we should view as being a significant change, but more perhaps documenting things we haven't documented, or for many of us, pulling out what we have already documented. And this is an example of a farm where clearly the farm waterways are identified there, and on this particular farm they've also got a wet area that's been identified as possible reversion back to a wetland, but not to be done straight away. The farmer in this instance thinking that perhaps around 2025 that's an activity they'd put in place. So as you see, that is largely activity that the farmer has already completed. In this case, it's activity that you've at least likely to have in your mind, if not documented. And that's what I want to leave you with in terms of farm planning, that it's really about further documenting details of your business and collating material together in an easily accessible manner. It may sometimes result in re-evaluating parts of our farm system to look for further efficiencies, but it should be something that, if we have that together, is adding value to our business. And that's why Beef and Lamb has committed to make sure that we help all farmers to have good documented plans in place. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share a little with you this morning. The other thing I'd like to ensure you're aware of is we have workshops happening across New Zealand in farm planning, and many more coming. Please keep in touch with your local extension managers and look on our website for when those events are coming up near you. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you this morning.